All right, now I'm back on. Now that we have all of the technology readily in hand, we are ready to begin. Stewardship in the next millennium. I'm delighted that you have joined us this evening. Before we begin, I wanted to talk a real brief moment about what the Episcopal Church Foundation is. The Episcopal Church Foundation's mission is to strengthen the leadership and financial capabilities of Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and communities of faith through their mission and ministry. Why do I raise that? Well, because at the heart of any fundraising opportunity is mission. You all know that. That's why you're here tonight, is because you know that your parish is up to something good, of something meaningful and impactful, and you want to make sure that there are funding and resources available to continue that mission. So what are we going to cover? We're going to talk a bit about the various kinds of givers that you might encounter in your parish or organization. Talk a bit about the changes in giving trends, how to reach different ages and commitment levels, and the role of gratitude and fun. As I mentioned before, along the way, if at any point you have a question, I want to know it. And so if you have a question, feel free to type in the chat box, and I will be happy to answer that readily. There are three different types of giving. The first type of giving is the type that we're going to be talking about this evening, and that type is annual giving. Annual giving specifically is used to fund the everyday operations of your parish, your operating budget. That would come from a donor's everyday or monthly cash flow. So this is part of their monthly budgeting, and it's tied to daily mission and ministry. However, sometimes annual giving can become conflated with another important type of fundraising, and that's capital campaign fundraising. Capital campaign funds are used specifically for projects, quite often buildings. More and more we're seeing capital funds used for retirement or endowment, or for deferred maintenance renovation. Capital campaigns are not used for everyday operations. So if there is a shortfall in your budget, that is not an appropriate use of capital campaign funds. Capital campaign funding from a donor's end can come from a myriad of different sources, but tends to come from a person's current assets. So what does that mean? It means it might come from a person's savings. It might come from a person's investment portfolio. It might come from that income tax refund that you're expecting, or for that increase in salary perhaps in a year or two. Some type of asset. We do also see then folks that extra sacrificially in order to pay for capital funds. Capital campaigns are specifically tied to future and growth. Planned giving is used to fund perpetual activities. It's tied to a person's estate, part of their will or their life plans. It's tied to the continuation of mission. Now, along the way, there are many different types of givers. And I always like to talk about this slide in the very beginning. As you understand the responsibility you have to your gifts, it's important for us to understand stewardship in its complexity. You see, oftentimes there is an assumption that a successful campaign would be where 100% of your parish will be giving. And I am here tonight to release you from that misleading concept. At no point will 100% of your parish likely give. And that is because of the basic breakdown of what we know statistically in the parish. Now, how many of you all know that the Episcopal Church has a statistician? Well, you can't. Many of you can't raise your hands, but if you could, I would look for hands. The Episcopal Church actually hires at age 15 a statistician who looks at various different demographics. And one of the things that we've learned through statistics over time, there tends to be three different types of givers. I want you to pay attention specifically to this inner circle right here. This inner circle is what you would call the converted group. This converted group give out a sense of devotion and understanding of stewardship, their relationship to God. Typically, they give about 8 to 12% of their income. Now, these are the folks that we tend to spend a lot of time preaching to the choir about, right? These are folks that we spend a lot of time sending our letters to. They're very important, and they should absolutely be a part of capital campaigns. However, these are folks that regardless of how you ask, whatever the vehicle is of the invitation, they're still going to give 8 to 12% because of a relationship to God. This is wonderful. Then on the external circle, you'll see here on the very far end, there is a group that would be called committed. So these folks have no theology of stewardship yet, although it's our job for them to have one eventually. They may give occasionally. So Christmas, Easter, what happens is they come to church and they tend to pull out their wallet, and then whatever is in their wallet they give. Now this is becoming increasingly more problematic with the lack of cash being carried and the use of credit cards and ATM cards, right? How are we able to just pull out $1 or $2 because people don't have them? These folks can comprise up to, get ready for this, 60% of your parish. As many as 60% of those in your pews can be this outer uncommitted group. Quite often we spend a lot of time worried about, well, why aren't we reaching these folks? What do we do? And I'm here to tell you to say, but for the purposes of increasing your annual giving, it can be a wise idea to instead move your volunteer resources, move your focus away from the uncommitted group that are still working out their relationship to the church, and focus on this middle group, this committed group. This committed group are likely to give to a number of different charities, and they give probably about 5% of their income to your parish. This is where you would call your growth potential. These are the folks that are able to potentially give more depending on the messaging and the formation and the theology and the education that we provide. So there's a way in which the external group, this outer circle, and this inner group, oftentimes we spend a lot of time worrying about them, and they are important. But it's a wonderful opportunity for us to look at this middle group for targeted formation. Now, fundraising itself is a professional skill backed by a lot of research. To the extent that you ignore some of the research, you'll continue to lose givers to nonprofits who can do it better. So let me tell you and show you a bit about what we know. So last year, 2013 contributions, one of the misperceptions is that there's a lot of grant funding out there, and that if we were able to secure grants rather than looking at individual fundraising, we would be able to become sustainable. This is something that I often come across. Looking at this pie chart, however, you can see that last year alone, $35 billion was raised by contributions. Now, looking at the largest piece of the pie, 72% of that was raised by individuals, or was donated by individuals. However, then you look at bequests at 8%, and you start to wonder, wait a second, bequests, that's from individuals as well. And then primarily the majority of foundations that are out there right now are family-based foundations run by individuals. So the majority of donations that were provided last year came from individual fundraising. No longer can we rely on grant funding. So where do they give? This provides you a piece of the landscape here. You'll see that religion comprised the highest percentage, 31%. This percentage is actually down 1% from 2012. And we'll talk about a bit where that percentage went. It looks like education is the next highest and human services. So where did the previous funding go? The previous funding primarily went, that 1% that was lost that was in religion, primarily went to human services that were able to demonstrate missional and ministry connection to their givers. So what we are starting to see in the Episcopal Church is what I like to think of as a tectonic shift in how we're talking about philanthropy. So baby boomers, defined as those born before 1946, have come of age as leaders and philanthropists. And they've brought some cultural shifts to these areas that are now impacting how Generation Xers and Millennials operate. This is important for two reasons. One, the last of the traditionalists turned 65 in 2010. With longer lifespans likely to be around for some time, but facing fixed incomes, retirements, health expenses, these traditionalists and the language and culture around philanthropy is waning. Because baby boomers then have set a certain tone, this shift is not likely to reverse itself anytime soon. So for now, I want to show you what this tectonic shift looks like in terms of how we talk about giving. One, notice how much the language on the left still sounds pretty much like the average church stewardship language. We have faith in our institution, motivated by duty. What does that mean? Meaning if we all did our part, we all just shared our load, thinking in terms of legacy. You know, we built this church, we have an obligation to continue. These are important messages, but they represent a culture that has shifted. Now look on the right, how much language on the right reflects the organizations that I mentioned in terms of human services. For example, Heifer. Heifer is an organization where you can spend about $500 to a cow. And they tell you how that changes the economy of the entire village. $500 quantified for results, the cow, and impact is the two-prong approach that is used in order to connect with donors. So for new philanthropists born in 1946 or later, they have a destructive institution. They're motivated by impact, and they think of giving in terms of results. They want to know, for their dollar, where does 90 cents of that dollar go to? The Heifer Fund is able to successfully fundraise because they're able to communicate both impact and show transparency and equity. So we talked about human service organizations. Some of those organizations where we have seen increases. Public society, international aid, and health. This is all tied to their ability to connect and impact, which is good news for us. Because from the dawning of the age, we have had a mission, a collective mission, even as an Episcopal church. So if money follows mission and biblical imperatives are widely accepted, then we already kind of have a foothold in the door. However, we have still quite a bit to learn. So, who are your committed? If you'll remember that chart that we talked about, the converted in the middle, the committed, your targeted formation area that we want to focus on, and your uncommitted, that wider circle. With that committed group are 4 different generations, and that's what I'm going to spend a large amount of time talking about tonight. Within that group is the greatest generation, were baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials. Now, if you would see fundraising as just a money-raising opportunity, as simply a means to an end, then you might be tempted to say, well, what's the point? Let's just put out a letter and that'll be good. But if you were to view fundraising as ministry, then we begin to see these generations as very different and important and needing different things. For example, when you think about pastoral care, you would approach pastoral care as a greatest generation person very differently than you would approach pastoral care as a millennial. The way you would talk would be different. The space in the room would be different. Perhaps the vehicle. Maybe you would do more emailing than you would do one-on-one. Maybe it would be in a different place. When you start to see fundraising as important ministry as any other ministry, then you begin to think about, well, what is it that these folks need in order to give resources for the kingdom of God at your parish? So there's the first generation I'd like to talk about, the great generation, the generation born before 1930. They are defined by the Great Depression, World War II, and patriotism. They are loyal to the church. They have a strong sense of obedience, and they have a trust in government and authority. So what does that actually mean? These are the folks that back in the day, a bishop or a rector could come to them and say, we need to raise X number of dollars. And out of a sense of duty, out of a sense of giving their part, they would give. These are folks that don't necessarily need to know where every piece of their dollar is going. They trust that it will be used accordingly. These folks often right now makes up the converted group. Now within that group, there is a subset called the silent generation. The silent generation is defined by Cold War, rising prosperity, and a willingness to sacrifice. So it's not just obedience, but an actual willing to give sacrificially. They value loyalty and conformity. I picture right here of barbershop singers. These are folks that value that priest that was there for them in their hardest challenge because of a sense of connection and loyalty. These are the folks that married young, more than now, I should say, and they set up the church as we know it. When you think about how you want to message your annual giving, you'll want to think about a message that is something connected to legacy. You've built this, and we are so grateful. Because of you, our church has been molded and shaped, and now we need your help to ensure that the ministries can continue and to live into their fullest as you have dreamed and planned. Strategy. When you think about the silent generation, they respond best by an authority figure providing the invitation. All right. I want to stop here before I move into the baby boomer generation and just note if you have any questions about any of the information I've provided, because there's been a good bulk of it, feel free to type in on the chat and we will be sure to address it as we go. Moving on, we have the baby boomer generation, and they exhibit very different generational characteristics than the prior. Formed between 1946 and 1964, they are defined by idealism and freedom of the 1960s. They currently have the highest divorce rate and the second marriages in history. So what does that mean? It means when you start to think about their giving capacity, it may be different because of this, because of second marriages and divorce. But that also impacts how they view establishment, how they view conformity. Baby boomers as a whole, speaking in generality, reject establishment and routines. This is the first generation to note that the self may be more important than the group. Now, oftentimes when I say that in a large group of people, that receives a negative response. I want to note that that actually can be a positive thing. The self being more important than the group means that appropriate self-care is given. It means also that these are folks that may value sustainability of the family versus sustainability of an organization. So they would be more concerned about ensuring that their family is taken care of rather than pledging sacrificially, which is just a shift in values. The next item would be information on how their gift is used. So what does that mean? That means that they don't just give because an authority figure has asked them to give, but rather they give because they want to know that it is being used wisely, the way that they have intended, and that there is impact for results. The baby boomer generation gave rise to an organization called Charity Navigator. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with it. The Charity Navigator essentially is a nonprofit that was created to rate other nonprofits. And what it does is it looks to see how donations are used. It looks to see what the amount of income is provided to the ED. It's there specifically because they want to help donors make wise decisions, and they also want to serve almost as a watchdog to nonprofits. That would not have been created had it not been for the cultural shift. So because of systematic distrust in establishment institutions, they need to have transparency. Now, before I move on, there was a question about what percentage of income does the average Episcopalian give to the church. I do not have that information. What I do know is that the average gift at this point is at around $2,100. The average donation is at $2,100 for Episcopalian. So when you are looking at the baby boomer, another factor is that the American dream was promised to them as children, and that because it was promised to them, because of that idealism, they are continuing to pursue that, meaning that everyone is able to live into their fullest potential. What does that mean in terms of messaging? It means that most of these folks, because they're looking to live into their potential because they have a mistrust of institutions, they are likely to be giving to multiple organizations. The greatest generation is likely to have given to one organization. The baby boomer generation might have 4, 5, 10 different organizations. And so your messaging to them is not, would you be willing to pledge to our parish, but rather, would you be willing to prioritize your giving and make our parish your number one priority? A fundamental shift. So what are some strategies then to appealing to this specific demographic? Narrative budget. We'll talk a bit about a narrative budget, but a narrative budget takes that budget that you see at the end or the beginning of the year, that Excel spreadsheet, and it creates narrative around it, creates visuals so that people can see impact, not just how money is being spent, but the impact of how their money is being spent. Very clear, compelling ways. This does not take the place of that regular Excel spreadsheet, but rather is supplementary to it. In addition, then there needs to be impactful storytelling. Have actual recipients of giving speak. So oftentimes what I like to recommend is if you are engaged in an outreach ministry in your community, have people that have been impacted by that outreach actually come to speak on a Sunday morning. So recently at my parish, our parish was involved in building up a clinic in Liberia, of all places. And I can tell you that there was a real disconnection to that project until, lo and behold, there was a person who was in the United States from Liberia who came to talk to our parish and personally say thank you and talk about the impact. That was such a profound experience to see an actual person impacted. Appeal to their idealism. Appeal to the idea that we all want to live in the American dream. Appeal to the idea of if we are all important, if we are all a collective family, then we hope that you will see us as a priority. Now, I was just asked, is the $2,100 per family or per person? That's per pledging unit. So typically that tends to be per family. And that is just to their parish. That's based on our parish statistics. So they are likely to be giving much more to other organizations. But that committed group, which comprises the majority of our targeted formation potential, are only giving 5% of their income or less. So the next group is a group that has been largely misunderstood. I like to think that it's not just because I'm this generation that I say that, but this generation, Generation X, was born between 1965 to 1978. They are defined by individualism, single-parent households. They are a weaker generation, part of dual-income families and single parents. They're part of white pay, saw the end of Cold War, and saw the beginning of mothers working. To be coupled later. You know, the days of being married at age 21, you're seeing people married between 28 and 32 more likely now. And that impacts how they're likely to give. They tend to be cynical of authority. These are the folks that might have the hardest time filling out a pledge card. Even though we absolutely know that we need pledge cards in order to build a budget, because there is a cynicism around institutions and they are defined by their individualism, they are likely to reject the idea that they would have to be part of the pledging process. This is the first generation that will not do as well financially as their parents did. Likely, this generation is likely to move or transition jobs 5+ times. And ironically, because of that, or in spite of that, take your pick, they wish to experience, though they may not attend regularly. So what does that mean? That means that a person in your parish might attend for a year, have to move on, and yet they might still feel a very strong connection to your parish because it might be the only parish that they've attended in the last 5 years because they've had to move so many times. So this idea that just because a person has moved on doesn't mean that they're not already a part of your parish and can still be looked at as potential for an annual giving opportunity. Their experience is tied to giving, and the messaging around that then becomes, we are a people and community who care about each other. So what they need specifically in order to give is a sense of relationship and tie. So it's important for you to put individuals in front of ministries, not necessarily recipients per se, but instead, if you have, say, a person that is in charge of the hospitality committee, it would be good for you to highlight that person while you're communicating about the ministry and look for ways in which to develop relationships. Because these folks are cynical about annual giving, these are folks that are likely to avoid annual giving in the fall. So it's important to think about stewardship and mentorship taking year-round. These are folks that grew up with the NPR fall telethon. These are folks that know about PBS. They know all of the different fundraising opportunities in the fall. They're not motivated by loyalty. They're not motivated by idealism. They're rather cynical. And so relationships year-round are going to be the way in which you look to connect with this particular group. One wonderful way to help connect this group to annual giving is allow them to work independently for your parish or for your stewardship team. Allowing them to feel a sense of autonomy in the way that they're volunteering or engaging is going to be very important. They need to feel as though this is on their own terms. Finally, we have the millennial generation. These folks were born between 1979, 1980, and 2000. This is a very exciting generation, and I can't wait to tell you why. This generation is defined by social consciousness. They are defined by their willingness to give of themselves. They were part of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. They remember school shootings. They remember terrorist attacks and the sense of wanting to give to society. Many of them also, as part of their education, were required to volunteer a certain number of hours, both in high school and in college. So there's already that formation as part of their upbringing. Parents are seen as advocates and friends. We'll get to why this is important in a moment. It's a given that they're going to be in debt, and so their capacity may not be large. Here's where it gets exciting. Pew Research claims that the giving characteristics of these folks are similar to the greatest generation, and they're likely to mirror the greatest generation in years to come. So what does that mean? That means that the way we educate and we form the millennials now has startling impact for years to come. Because if millennials give out of a sense of social consciousness and duty, then these can become our largest growth potential for the future. I am so excited about this group. These are the first generation of children with schedules. Gone are the days of the free afternoon. They have plenty of things that are on their plate. They know how to keep their own calendar. These are folks that require mentorships and relationships to affirm decisions. You may have in the last 3 or 4 years, the New York Times has been running a number of different articles about what is the impact of millennials in college and in the workplace. And what they're saying is that parents are showing up, both at college and the workplace, advocating for their child when something goes wrong. Now, whether you like that idea or not, we have a lot to learn from that, because it tells us that these are folks that respond very well to positive affirmation. These are folks that respond very well to feedback. And they require that relationship in order to make decisions. And so the way in which we build relationships with them now is going to impact their giving. So the message to them is not, we need you to give, otherwise we won't meet our budget, but rather the message is your gift is important and it will impact lives. And now how do we get to know you? How do we connect with you? Strategy. One of the organizations that I've worked with that has seen substantial growth in annual giving actually sought as an annual giving strategy to create mentor relationships between millennials and baby boomers. And as part of that mentoring relationship, talking about what does membership mean at the parish in a number of different forms. Another piece of this is immediate gratification for giving. So what has been the common rule of thumb is for a giver to receive a letter, or even better, a handwritten thank you note for where a person makes a pledge. The millennial will not tell you that thank you in the same way. A millennial would look like, would need to have a more quick response. Millennials would need to have a text or an immediate email or even an immediate phone call. That would be the best. An immediate phone call to say thank you for your pledge. Within 24 hours, that needs to take place. Timeliness is much more valued than the handwritten note for this particular generation. Online community presence. This is another piece. Oftentimes we talk about online giving, and in fact we will a little bit tonight. When you think about online community presence, I like to highlight the word community. Because millennials are seeking relationships, they're looking for community. So when you're thinking about how do you cultivate a website presence, oftentimes people think we just get information up on our Facebook or up on our webpage, and then we have a donate now button, then we will have hip, hip, hooray. Actually, though, when we think about what is community at its heart requires mutuality, especially mutuality in conversation. So thinking about how is the way in which you can engage others in a conversation that's dynamic online as a community. All right. So what are strategies? Immediate gratification for giving, online community presence, online stories of impact. Ask these folks to be part of focus groups. Ask them for their opinions. Put them in charge of using technologies for appeals. That way, they are invested in the process and are also able to bring to it some of their knowledge and skill of what's currently working. Utilize their networks and have them plan events that interest them. And then this is something that I just found out, but many of you might be interested to know that mid-century modern is cool again. And so for those of you that have mid-century pieces at your parish, know that this might be an asset to you. So when you think of targeted format, look to see who would be that committed group, that growth potential. Determine who are those folks. Make a list. Then start to think about, okay, how do I create different vehicles for different donors? For the baby boomer, a message that could be sent out to them is the prioritization of people giving, providing them information about where does $1 go, provide in-person stories of impact. For the Generation Xer, look for ways to tie their time, their experience with giving. If they experience an institution, they're more likely to trust it. Lose the language of obligation. Lose that language of duty. Lose the language of we'll have to do our part. These are folks that are motivated by individualism, and so that will have a negative impact on them. Utilize moments of thanks throughout the year for education. So this is something that I've seen be exceptionally helpful. What can happen is throughout the year, not just in the fall, but say February, March, April, have someone in your parish stand up for less than 30 seconds and say, you know, because of your donation, your generous donation, we are able to do X, and I am so grateful. So an example of that was, come March, your choir gives a beautiful anthem, has everybody in tears. And the rector stands up and says, thank you, choir members, choir director, and thank you, all of you. It's because of your generous donations, we are able to sustain this ministry and be able to worship together. That's it. There's no invitation to give. There's no special appeal. You're tying their gifts to impact, and there's also then a perceived sense of transparency because they can see where their gifts went. You can do that for Sunday school, youth ministry. You can do that for building. You can say, I just want to say that the windows today are looking exceptionally beautiful. It's because of all of your donations that we're able to keep up the building. Heat in the winter, air conditioning in the summer. All of these are very tangible things that people can taste, touch, see, feel, experience. And these are education opportunities throughout the year. Now, millennials, act quickly, ask for their opinion, provide online stories of impact, online community presence, and they're used to giving up time but need feedback, immediate feedback. So many folks are surprised when I say this, but in the nonprofit world, currently the rule of thumb is that we thank donors 7 different ways. This rule of thumb that the United Way employs and Red Cross, we look for 7 different ways to thank people throughout the year. That can seem daunting, except for I like to say that by thanking people, that's actually an opportunity to educate people on how their gift was used. And it can be done in a variety of different ways, whether it be from a thank you card to a stewardship moment like I just described from the pulpit to a one-on-one simple thank you to your major donor. Whatever you choose to do, your thanks should be timely and personal and done in a way that evokes your mission. So the top 3 reasons that people give, according to Mega Gifts, they have a belief in the cause, a respect for staff leadership, and fiscal responsibility. When you think about that, then you can see how the different generational characteristics play into that. Belief in the cause connects with both the idealism of the baby boomer and that generation, greatest generation. Respect for staff leadership implies transparency and impact, and fiscal responsibility certainly connects with all of the last 3 generations, the baby boomer, the Generation X, and the millennial. So Why can't my daughter give world peace? What does it mean? What I'm talking about was why can't my daughter give world peace is what I described with heifer a bit. One of the hardest things that parishes have to do is when thinking about the operating budget, the operating budget can seem rather nebulous, can seem rather vague. It's not something really tangible. You know, your priest time, it's really hard to your hands around it and say, oh, okay, I got 2 apples, 3 bananas, and 4 kiwi for my investment, right? It's very hard for us to quantify, in the same way that's hard to quantify world peace. So one of the ways that Heifer Foundation then has been exceptionally successful is the fact that they were able to take their overhead costs when they were thinking about this idea of fighting world hunger. They quantified what that overhead cost was, because certainly the Heifer Foundation or organization has overhead costs like all of us. They need people to raise up those cows, feed those cows, and they need the accountants to make sure the money is going where it's supposed to. They have overhead costs. They figured in those costs in the amount that you're paying for your donation for that cow. So that $500 for the cow includes their 10 to 12% overhead. It's already factored in. It's very wise for the person that really wants to be able to see how their gift is being used. And so oftentimes I like to recommend what are some tangible ways in which you can communicate your parish's ministry in a way that people can buy in. For example, I've seen a parish look to see how many different volunteer hours it took on a Sunday morning in order for the worship service to take place. Then what they did was they quantified that number of volunteer hours, and they were amazed to find that each Sunday they were receiving an in-kind gift of over $1,000. Another parish then looked to see, okay, we have an operating budget of $200,000, and they divided that by the number of weeks. And then they said, okay, so each Sunday, each week, it costs us X number of dollars to have our Sunday worship service and our week-long ministries. And then what they did was, then they divided that. Then they were able to communicate. And then what they did was then they went so far as to break it down into 365 days. And they had people support a day or more per year. And then they sent thank yous to those folks on those particular days. It's that way of making your mission and ministry tangible that's very appealing to the baby boomer who needs transparency, and also very appealing to that millennial who might not have a large amount of capacity but wants to support your organization, but needs a way to see how it's being used. When you're talking about stories, make sure your stories aren't just stories that communicate particular generation's characteristics, but rather look for impactful ways of communicating. Ask your newcomers to speak. Repeat these stories and attach them to your mission. Henry Nouwen writes in his book that we use at the Episcopal Church Foundation, Quality of Fundraising, when fundraising is done right, the person asking and the person giving come together to participate in a new thing that God is doing. When you are thinking about how to see fundraising as ministry, it's good for us to remember that the work that you are engaged in is transformational, and it has the power to change lives, so that in giving and in inviting others to give, we become transformed in the process. Whoever is not against us is, as we read in Mark. about your budget when you're communicating that to your donors. Make sure your budget is proof. Make it available on request, and make sure that it's reflective of your mission. Earlier, I talked about a narrative budget. Here is an example of a narrative budget in front of you. What you will see is that they have divided their budget across 4 different pieces: worship, faith formation, social outreach, diocesan pledge, and then the rest. That way people can see exactly 41% of their pledge goes to worship. 22% of their pledge goes to faith formation. Finally, when thinking about annual stewardship, I must tell you that there is a surprising number of folks that still use a letter, and only a letter, as a way to communicate to prospective donors. However, what our fundraising statistics are showing us, specifically out of Indiana in 2013 from their fundraising school, we found that a response rate to a letter is about 1 to 3%. When you do a one-to-one ask in a nonprofit, you can expect your response rate to be about 22%. However, if you are a church, you can see that be elevated up to 42%. So the impact of a one-on-one ask is exponential. It absolutely has to take place. What I often recommend is that you look at who are those folks in your committed group and start year after year, begin with 8 to 10 one-to-one visits, and each year then begin to increase that number. This does not need to be in every member campus, but looking at who are those that are giving 5%, and look to see if you can have a one-on-one that would be able to increase that. When you have your personal visit, make sure that you also look to see ways in which you compare that visit, that the person who is going to offer the invitation and the prospective donor. Look to see if you can pair those people in ways in which friendships are facilitated. So one of the surprising statistics I just read last week is that 52% of all donors ranked friends asking for money as most effective. Not, a complete stranger asking for money, not your priest per se, but rather a friend, a peer-to-peer ask. When thinking about giving, you'll need to get online. You can't afford not to. If you're not online already, there are lots of wonderful online resources. It's the only method for giving for the under 40 demographic. It's actually a point of entry for newcomers and churches, and it stabilizes giving. So for those that are engaged in automatic deductions, oftentimes people forget their checkbooks. But if you engage in automatic deductions, then this is down on the level of attrition, especially for those that are those Generation Xers that move 5 to 10 times. Having automatic deduction secures their giving. When thinking about what online resource to use, whether it be PayPal or all the different varieties, focus on user experience, not on fees. Oftentimes people can get caught up in, well, this service charges us this number of dollars and this charges us X number of dollars. What I would suggest is look to see what service is going to allow a person to give in the easiest way, because it takes multiple clicks for a potential donor, they're likely to give up. Form a committee to review the online giving opportunities and involve potential users in that. Always remembering that starting is better than perfect. It's better just to get up and running and then perfect it as you go. I was just asked, without knowing actual individual incomes, are there helpful ways to estimate what kind of percentage a family is giving? What I would suggest is that if you have a person that is giving less than the national average, that is a good place to begin. And that's always my first point of contact. Less than $2,100 or right around that $2,100 to $3,000 is likely to fall within that targeted formation. I also always suggest that you involve your parish leadership in that conversation as you're creating your committed list. Oftentimes they might have information about, such and such just was diagnosed with cancer and perhaps would not be an appropriate person to join the committed list at this time. Remember along the way to have fun. This is a great opportunity to engage people in fun activities. You've heard of Mad Libs. This is St. Paul's, where for their annual giving campaign, they created a Mad Lib. And every person who filled out a pledge card got to fill out the Mad Lib, and it was a lot of fun. One of the number one things you want to do is involve as many people as possible. This was a shocking documentary by St. Mark's Sundance Company at a parish. And I show this not to advertise the video, but rather look at the number of different names that are involved. You want to involve as many different people. Now, change can be good. I know it can be overwhelming when you're thinking about all the different vehicles and different messages, but change can be absolutely wonderful. So, I want to quiz you in our last 5 minutes of time together. There was a person that said, the new system has met with unrivaled success because of its flexibility, accommodating itself to the diversified wants of the various congregations. The person who said that was the Reverend Stahl in 1881. This was at the beginning of the pledge card, when the pledge card was first created in order to move us away from paying for pews. Along the way, if you have questions or concerns, or you would like to have more direct services in terms of consulting services, Terry Mathis and Louise Baedo are wonderful points of contact, and I would highly recommend you being in touch. There's our 800 number, and we are always here to walk alongside of you. Now, in our last 5 minutes or so, are there any questions? While there's typing taking place, I wanted to let you know there are some upcoming webinars, and I've got the list up ahead here. Vestries the next 6 months, vital teams, and integrating annual capital and planned giving. As always, it will be recorded. So if at any point you had to drop out, or if you gained so much from this, you want to share this with others, feel free to send that link to others. I am so very grateful for your participation. Know that we are so grateful for the opportunity to work with parishes and organizations of all sizes. As you move forward, I wish you many blessings on your annual campaign. Good night, everyone.
Good night.